By 1980, tabletop role-playing was exploding into the cultural mainstream, its record-breaking sales ironically supercharged by the moral panic of parents and media commentators convinced the game was dangerous. Despite this rapid expansion, the physical architecture of the game remained restricted. Play was defined entirely by the dungeon crawl, a world of subterranean labyrinths, 10-foot-wide stone corridors, and locked doors. In these enclosed spaces, the dungeon master exercised total, meticulous control over exactly what the players encountered and when. This created a logistical wall for the designers of the new D&D expert set. As characters reach levels 4 through 14, they acquire the power to cast wide-reaching spells or hire small armies. A cramped hallway stops making narrative sense. These characters require vast open worlds, but open worlds mean players can wander in any direction, directly threatening the dungeon master's ability to prepare and control the story. In 1981, designers David Cook and Tom Moldvay provided the solution. They published X1, The Isle of Dread, an adventure forcing players out of the dark and into the blinding, hostile sunlight of a tropical wilderness. To establish this new environment, they discarded the knights and castles of traditional European high fantasy. In their place, they adopted the gritty, survivalist tone of early 20th century pulp magazines, leaning into the perilous atmospheres of lost worlds and uncharted lands. The Isle of Dread was engineered to be a didactic toolkit. Bundled directly with the new rule set, it acted as a practical manifesto, teaching an entire generation of players and dungeon masters exactly how to build, map, and survive an open-world sandbox. Hundreds of miles south of the mainland lies the Thanagioth archipelago. Its focal point is the Isle of Dread, a sprawling, untamed frontier violently bisected by a monolithic stone wall. To navigate this space, the module handed players something highly unusual, a blank map. The page featured nothing but the bare outline of the coast, completely empty in the center. This blank canvas, overlaid with a hexagonal grid, is the physical engine of the hex crawl. As the party moves inland, players must physically draw the terrain onto their map, hex by hex, relying entirely on the dungeon master's verbal descriptions. Every single hex requires calculation. The terrain dictates movement speed. Trudging through dense swamps drains your supplies faster than open plains, and thick jungle canopies increase the mathematical probability that your party will simply become lost. Shifting the burden of mapping onto the players turned the map into a high-stakes navigational puzzle, making the physical act of drawing an essential mechanic for their survival. On the Isle of Dread, the primary antagonist is the environment itself. Players face constant logistical pressure from exposure, tropical weather systems, and the reality of dwindling rations. To populate this ecology, the module introduced wandering monster tables strictly tied to distinct geographic zones. Predators roaming the coastal beaches were entirely different from threats found on the central volcanic plateau. The module advised dungeon masters against dropping monsters on the table just because the dice said so. It taught them to signal the threat first, describing enormous tracks in the mud or the sound of trees breaking in the distance, building tension before the encounter began. For the island's most bizarre and isolated threats, David Cook drew direct inspiration from the creeping, cosmic horror of authors like H.P. Lovecraft. But the module maintains absolute modularity. There is no predetermined narrative track, and no ticking clock pushing players toward the center. They are driven inward purely by their own curiosity. If they do survive the trek to the center of a crater lake, they discover Taboo Island. Here, the sun-drenched jungle drops away, trapping players in a claustrophobic, partially submerged ruin. Waiting in the water are the Kopru. These ancient, amphibious architects of the island avoid combat, relying instead on a potent and escapable ability to dominate the minds of the player characters. This introduced a terrifying new dynamic to tabletop design. Instead of simply depleting hit points with claws and teeth, the Kopru subverted player autonomy. It forced a tense, paranoid struggle where trusted party members suddenly became lethal enemies. The historical weight of X1 is extensive. Its continental map provided the first geographical anchor for the beloved Mystara campaign setting, and its systems officially codified the hexcrawl format for decades of future publications. Today, however, the landscape of tabletop gaming looks entirely different. The manual, math-heavy, anxiety-inducing cartography of 1981 has largely been replaced by the rise of virtual tabletops. Modern digital software automatically clears the fog of war. When a player moves their token, the computer calculates the terrain and instantly reveals the surrounding map in high definition, effectively automating the entire exploration process. Modern adventure design also approaches the sandbox differently. Highly praised modern jungle hex crawls like Tomb of Annihilation often lay a narrative ticking clock over the map, such as a world-ending death curse that forces players to push forward quickly. This presents a distinct design paradox. If the core joy of a hex crawl is the freedom to explore an environment, does imposing a strict narrative deadline actually punish players for exploring? Decades later, the Isle of Dread endures as a masterclass in open-world design, precisely because it lacks that coercion. It proves that the tension of a true sandbox doesn't come from a timer. It comes from staring at a blank piece of paper and making the choice to walk into the unknown.